let's cue the music and start that word chat.
Welcome, everybody. Am I still sharing? I am. I missed the button. Hi, everybody. Welcome to that word chat. Exciting show today. We have Cory Doctorow, who is like somebody I've never met, but I've been reading for years. He's sort of this this presence everywhere I go to consume information. He's a author, journalist, pioneer, I think is safe to say, of online media. He writes about the internet, big tech, capitalism, social causes. Author of many books. His latest is a thriller, The Bezzle, which is a follow-up to a book last year, Red Team Blues. He says the science fiction novel Lost Cause, which looks into climate change. And he also writes a lot of nonfiction. So his latest book there is The Internet Con, How to Seize the Means of Computation. These are just like the last year or so. So I think you actually said 4 books. Did I mention? Lost Cause. Yeah, I mentioned all 4. Those are all in the past 18 months. How are you so prolific?
Well, I write to distract myself from anxiety. And so during lockdown, I wrote 9 books. And they're all coming out between 2022 and 2026, which is why I'm on tour between 2022 and 2026. I got back the day before yesterday. I'm leaving again tomorrow.
Yeah, I saw. I mean, I Googled, looked online, and it seems like you were in Italy because there's, I looked at a talk you did, and it was started out in Italian. And I realized it was just like a week ago or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I gave the keynote at the Turin Biennale Tecnologia, which I'm sure I pronounced very badly. And I am next up doing a series of gigs in Canada. So I'll be in Winnipeg on Thursday, and then Calgary the next day, and Vancouver on Saturday. And then on Sunday, I fly to Estonia to keynote the Tartu Literary Festival and speak at the Science Fiction Research Association annual meeting, which is also there. And then I'm going to do a gig with local makers and hackers.
Okay. And so where are you now? Are you in Los Angeles now?
I'm in Burbank. Yeah, I'm in Burbank. So, butt of many jokes in 1970s television shows, and a lovely place to live.
Yeah. Yeah. Not you don't hear that so much anymore. I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, nice airport there. I love how you just
best airport in America.
Is like
it turns out that the secret to a really good airport is you just don't bring it up to code, right? If all the planes come really, really close to the terminals so that like you can board from the back and the front, and then you park them really close together so you can walk the whole length of the terminal in 10 minutes, it makes for a very comfortable airport, provided none of those planes ever blows up.
Right.
If that happens, we're seriously hosed. But for now, YOLO.
I loved the idea. I loved actually walking out of the airport and realizing, oh, wait a second, where do I get my bags? And no, you're not to baggage claim yet. It's just right there.
Yeah, that's right.
So let me start out. You write about if there's a theme, it's sort of the I should back up. You write nonfiction, you write fiction. There does seem to be the common thread of you mentioned anxiety, but sort of the idea of people not having control and big tech and how we're maybe giving up some of our existence to forces beyond our control. We have a lot of viewers who are creatives, who are editors and writers, who work in the publishing field. It seems easier to get published these days with because you have more of a direct connection to the world than maybe you used to. But then we're giving up some things with that ability, and so are creatives better off now, or are they worse off now?
So I'd say that the theme that runs through my work, and this is maybe a backwards way to back into answer your question, but the theme that runs through my work is community determination and self-determination. So like not so much what the machine's doing, but who it's doing it for and who it's doing it to. You know, I think of that as the foundational question of the Luddites, right? Not like how do we weave cloth, but who gets to decide how the labor markets for weaving cloth works, and will they be done by skilled tradespeople or by children kidnapped from Napoleonic War orphanages and indentured for 10 years in textile mills? And that's the question the textiles wanted to answer. They weren't, for no matter what you've heard, they weren't afraid of technology. These were like
Yeah, I'll never think of Luddite as the same way as you. You know, I mean, it just
yeah.
come to mean somebody who's anti-technology, but clearly,
Yeah, you know, to be a textile worker in a guild, you needed 10 years experience or 7 years experience in the field. It was like getting a master's degree in engineering at MIT. These were not technophobes. And people at the time knew it. You know, Lord Byron's maiden speech in the House of Lords was in defense of the Luddites. And one of the child workers who was kidnapped to work in the factory after 10 years when his indenture was over, he's one of the few survivors, wrote a best-selling memoir. His name was Robert Blincoe. And among the people who found that memoir very moving was Charles Dickens, who used it as the basis for Oliver Twist, which is basically Luddite fanfic. And Mary Shelley spoke openly about the idea that Frankenstein was a Luddite story. It was a story about how when entrepreneurs get to build machines without any recourse to their community, the machine runs amok and the workers get the worst of it. So, you know, this was like at the time a very good, well understood view, and it's quite a tribute to the idea that history is written by the victors, that we now think of Luddite as a synonym for technophobe. So in those lights, if we want to talk about what makes life good for creative workers of all kinds, I think it boils down to community determination and self-determination. Do you get to make the art you want to make? Can you reach the audiences for your work such as they are? Can you and the people who form your community of practice exercise some control over your norms and over, you know, the way that you work together and collaborate and so on? And I think the answer is that in all of those regards, things are not great. And they mostly have to do with competition in markets more so than technology. The technology is kind of maybe has contributed to the concentration in markets, and also it kind of fuels or acts as a force multiplier on market power by a small number of firms. But, you know, in a world where we have like 5 giant publishers and 4 giant studios and 3 giant labels, 2 companies that control all the ad tech and 1 company that controls all the ebooks and audiobooks, it's very hard to get a good deal. And, you know, this kind of answers the question that my colleague Rebecca Giblin and I set out to answer in our 2020 book, Choke Point Capitalism, or 2021 book, I beg your pardon, Choke Point Capitalism, where we asked ourselves, how is it that for 40 years we've made copyright last longer, we've made it cover more kinds of works, we've made the penalties for violating copyright stiffer, you know, $150,000 in statutory damages per download, that we've made it easier to get those damages. We've made the industries much richer, so they are both bringing in more money, and more of that money is profit, so they're both more profitable and larger. And the share of income going to creative workers, both proportionally and in real terms, has gotten smaller over that time. And I think the answer is that if you're bargaining with 5 publishers, 4 labels, 3 studios, 2 ad tech companies, or 1 company that does the ebooks and audiobooks, having more copyright doesn't help you bargain for keeping more of it. It's just more for them to take. It's like giving your bullied school kid extra lunch money, right? You have to intervene in the structure of the market, which, you know, we saw the Screenwriters Guild do, because they were able to do sectoral bargaining, something that was banned under the Taft-Hartley Act in '48, and which was grandfathered in for the screenwriters and a few of the other Hollywood guilds.
sectoral
Bargaining.
bargaining with an entire sector of.
Yeah, that's where all the screenwriters get together and they bargain with all the studios as a unit, as opposed to the way it would work, well, like, look, the UAW just did a kind of backwards sectoral bargaining where they went on strike against the big three automakers and they
A big
negotiated a
target.
deal among all three. But that was three different strikes. It wasn't one strike. And it would be much more normal for the UAW to strike against one firm and negotiate a deal, and then strike against another firm and negotiate a deal, and so on.
Mhm. So, as so there's a problem with a few people holding the means of production, I guess, the outlets to this, but
Choke
at the same
points.
time, choke points. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
choke point capitalism. So what? But then the question is, are we? Am I wrong? Am I wrong to think it feels a little bit better because I feel like anybody can publish a book on Amazon?
Yeah, so I think that the system that Amazon has works well but fails badly. So, the Amazon was allowed to. So let me back up one step. 40 years ago, we kind of stopped enforcing antitrust law, and the enforcement of antitrust law has gotten weaker every year for 40 years. So among the things antitrust law like formally prohibits but practically permits is buying vertical or horizontal competitors. So horizontal competitor of Amazon would be like Zappos, which is a company that sells e-commerce shoes, and Amazon sells e-commerce shoes. So they buy the competitor and they merge them. Facebook buying Instagram, Uber buying a ton of rideshare companies, that kind of thing. And then a vertical one would be Amazon buying Audible. So Audible was the leading audiobook provider in 2008 when Amazon bought them. They are now a monopolist, thanks to the combination of market power that Amazon was able to bring to it. More than 90% of audiobook sales go through Audible. And Audible does have this self-serve platform called ACX. And they actually go to great lengths to facilitate independent production of audiobooks on ACX. You can do things like you can say, oh, well, I have a book and I'm looking for a reader and I'm offering a revenue share and no upfront money, and it will connect independent writers and independent readers, and then you make an audiobook and they facilitate the revenue share. And that works great. And there's nothing bad about the fact that there is a place where you can find all the audiobooks really easily, and a place that facilitates the production of audiobooks, even by people who are not connected with one of those 5 giant publishers. The problem is that Audible does wage theft. So there's this, if you want to find the kind of the keyword to search on, it's Audiblegate. Audible does this accounting trick that has allowed them to steal at least $100 million from its independent audiobook authors. Moreover, because they have 90% of the market, if you get kicked out of Audible's platform, you effectively cease to exist. So if you don't mind having all your money stolen, and also having the high-handed decisions of a company that doesn't even have a customer service department, much less an author relations department that you can reach, decide who gets published and who doesn't, even though, largely they're king log and their decision is sure anyone can get published, but when they say no, there's no court of appeal and nowhere else to go, then yeah, this is a much more pluralistic system, in the sense that there are a lot more authors being published by ACX than would have been published through the traditional audiobook side. And it's a bit like, if you go to your grocery store, everything on the shelves comes from either Procter & Gamble or Unilever, with plus or minus 10%. And if, like, your local hipster cookie makers and leather aprons make a cookie that everybody loves and it's flying off the shelves of the grocery store, either Unilever or Procter & Gamble are going to buy those cookies, right? They're going to buy the brand out. When they do, they're going to issue a press release that says, we bought out Hipster Brothers cookies because we know our customers value choice. And it's like you can choose all the cookies that Procter & Gamble sells, but you can't get cookies that aren't from Procter & Gamble.
Right. Okay. So who is your do you work with one of the major publishers?
Yeah, I'm a Macmillan author, so I'm published by Tor Books. That's the science fiction imprint. It's the largest science fiction imprint in the world. My graphic novels come from First Second, which is their graphic novel imprint. And I've just done another deal that is not yet announced, but with one of their nonfiction imprints. I'm published by other publishers as well. PM Press did a book of mine. I did a book with McSweeney's and a book with Beacon, which is, this 180-year-old press owned by the Unitarians. Albert Einstein once wrote in a letter, if there is hope for the future, it's the Universalist Unitarians and Beacon Press. And I had a book from Verso last year too.
So how do you feel about Macmillan, just between us?
Yeah, well,
everybody watching.
They're one of the big five, and I think they exemplify the problem of market concentration, which is that the goodwill and good people who are within Macmillan, and I sincerely believe that this is a company that is made up of people who really believe in a mission of good literature and well-treated authors and so on, that all of that is trapped in institutional imperatives, that as concentration increases, the imperatives of those institutions that run counter to the interests of both literature and authors are harder to balance. That, so Macmillan has always let me retain my audiobook rights because I won't sell on Audible. Among other things, Audible has this policy that everything that is sold on Audible has to be wrapped in their encryption so that it can't be played on an app that hasn't been approved by Audible. It means that if I'm getting my wages stolen from Audible and I quit Audible and I say to my readers, okay, here's the tool that unlocks your books from Amazon's app and lets you take it to another app. I'm now selling my audiobooks elsewhere. That releasing that tool because of the rules around copyright protection, something called Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Releasing that tool is a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. So it basically means that my readers are shackled to Amazon's platform forever. And I feel like this is cutting my own throat and also just profoundly unethical. I don't want to be bait for this system. So Macmillan's always let me keep those rights, but it's getting harder and harder because the audio rights account for a larger and larger fraction of Macmillan's expected return. And if you don't sell on Amazon, I do Kickstarters to pre-sell these books, and that's where I get all my sales. And then I just get a trickle of sales from all the other platforms that combined amount to 10% of Amazon's market share, right? But it's just a tiny trickle. And so they're just like, it's not worth doing. But, we're in this place where it's like they're eventually maybe going to end up saying, well, your principles are very nice, but either you let me sell these books on Audible or we stop publishing your print books because we can't afford to continue to take the loss that's represented by not selling on Audible, even though we know in kind of a corporate strategy perspective that allowing Amazon to lock our books up with its encryption, with its digital rights management, is not in the long-term interest of the firm.
It seems like there's a lot of things that are not in the long-term interest, but are in the short-term, even, this year interest. And interesting, you said that, Macmillan's got some great people who care about literature. And I find that in most cases, people who work for a publisher are going to be drawn there because they care about literature. But it often amazes me how people who are good people sort of realize that they're in a situation where they have to feed the corporate entity that is sometimes maybe not even really what they think it is, but something they think ought to be done.
Well, and it's not just the corporate entity because, I as it happens, am friends with the owner of Macmillan, Stefan von Holtzbrink, who's, part of this old German publishing family, and we've known each other for years. And I even think he's one of those people who cares about it. I think that when I talk about institutional imperatives, it's not a euphemism for what the CEO wants. It is about institutions enmeshed in markets that are increasingly concentrated end up acting like all the other parties in that market. So here's an example. When the pharma companies were allowed to consolidate about 25 years ago, they put the screws to the hospitals and they said, we're going to start charging gigantic margins on drugs that you've been buying at a reasonable price. So the hospitals formed regional monopolies, and they rolled up all the hospitals within 100 miles and 1 or 2 chains across most of America. And that gave them the ability to push back against pharma companies. And they said, great, from now on, if you want your chemo drugs sold within 100 miles of here, we go back to the old price. And then the hospitals turned around and stuck it to the insurers. And the insurers formed regional monopolies. So in most regions, you have between 1 and 3 choices of medical insurers. Now, there's 2 groups of people in the medical supply chain who are not organized in the way that these different pieces of the supply chain are. There's medical workers, right, who are getting paid less and working under worse conditions than at any time in history. And there's patients who are paying more and getting worse health outcomes than at any time in history. Publishing follows this, right? We saw there's a law that bans companies from extracting large discounts, like deeper discounts, not just quantity breaks, but deeper discounts on the same quantity, just because they're very big. So Walmart, according to this law, shouldn't be allowed to get a better deal on products than its rivals if it's ordering similar quantities. And that law was stopped being enforced in the 1980s. And what happened was the mass market, which is all the books sold outside of bookstores. So there's trade books that are sold to the trade. They're sold to bookstores. They look like this. They're 6 inches by 9 inches, and they fit in a bookcase. And then there's mass markets that look like this, and they're sold in like spinner racks in pharmacies and groceries. The mass market went from 300 distributors to 3, and now it's 1. Right, it's Ingram, because there was massive retail consolidation in the retail side, and so the distribution side consolidated. Now, at the same time, the number of publishers fell from 30 to 5 major publishers in New York. Same reason that hospitals and pharma companies and insurers all consolidated. And now you have the same phenomenon where you have 2 loose flapping ends, right? You have the creative workers, and you have the readers. The readers are paying more, the creative workers are getting paid less, and everyone in the middle is kind of hosed. Not only that, but everyone working in an editorial capacity, those people who love books, are in the same position that we writers are in, which is that they have 5 potential employers, just like we have 5 potential bidders for our books. And no one can afford to get rank with any of them. One of the largest publisher in the world, who I won't name, but you can figure it out, stiffed me for about $15,000 about 4 years ago, and my agent said it's not worth it. Just walk away. Yes, you could win a lawsuit, but the lawsuit will cost you more than $15,000 against your career earnings by being known as the author who sued one of the big 5 than you will get from the 15 grand. And so, that's the situation we live in. And yeah, Melissa says she had no idea mass market trade books are now only Ingram. It's true. And not only that, but I said Rebecca and I wrote this book, Choke Point Capitalism, about concentration in arts and tech markets. So Random House turned down that book. They weren't interested in publishing a book about how Random House was a big bad monopoly that should be broken up. But Random House distributes Beacon, because Ingram is so shitty to the independent publishers that they're all going to the big 5 for distribution. And so Random House got $1 every time we sold a book about how bad Random House was, a book that Random House itself declined to publish.
We have a follow-up question. If you have questions, and I should point out, when you were reaching for the books, you told us just before the show started that your camera is controlled by AI, and that's why it's sort of doing this thing where it's trying to figure out where your nose is.
Right.
I guess
It's following me around.
Well, that worked. That was impressive.
Yeah, now it's working. Before it thought that the only part of my head that mattered was my forehead. So it's nice that it's decided my whole face is worth showing.
If you have a question, feel free to ask it in the room, and we'll. What we do is we have our people in the room come on video and ask their questions if they have one. And Heather kind of keeps track of that, and Heather tells me we have a question, but it turns out it's from her. So,
all right,
Heather, what was your question?
It's a follow-on from Audible Gates. I really liked in your book, IRL, the quote, "Working together is the secret origin story of our species." And so it makes me wonder, what can we as an industry, as editors and creators, do to be positive disruptors in this space?
Yeah, well, I think that there's as the quote implies, very little or not very little, but there are great limitations on what we can do as individuals. And as I said, sectoral bargaining was banned in 47 under the Taft-Hartley Act. But there's lots more interest now in forming unions among white collar shops. And it is through that kind of collective action, good unions held to account by their membership, that creative workers have shown most consistently that they're able to flex their muscle in the service to a better artistic environment and a better cultural environment. Unions are a pain in the ass, right? It's a pain in the ass to join one. It's a pain in the ass to organize one. It's a pain in the ass to go to the meetings. I'm a member of several unions. I am the child of union organizers. They're a pain in the ass. It's worth it. Lots of things are a pain in the ass. My wife will tell you that being married is a pain in the ass. But I would never say such a thing. The point of an institution, of any institution, a union, a corporation, a church, the mafia, a sports league, is to lower the transaction costs of doing things together. And one of the things that the current wave of unions has done is figured out how to be more democratic and how to spend less time having meetings and more time getting stuff done. And you couldn't ask for, I mentioned the UAW and Sean Fain. You couldn't ask for a better example than what the UAW did. It's an incredible story. The UAW was under really rotten leadership for a really long time. They were they just had these sellout union bosses who had plumped for these things called two-tier contracts, where the workers who'd been in the union for a long time got a good deal and all the new workers got a bad deal, but the new workers still had to pay union dues, and this made them wildly unpopular. And it was just like such an obviously, suicidal measure that it's amazing that anyone ever voted for it. So the thing was that they were masters of procedure, and whenever anyone tried to kick out the old leadership, they would just wave the rule book around and say, you're out of order, that we don't have quorum. It's time to adjourn. A motion to adjourn is always in order, whatever, right? Just this kind of procedural nonsense. So the UAW went out and organized the Harvard grad students, who are a seriously precaritized group of workers who are also incredibly good at memorizing rule books. And so when the next UAW leadership meeting was held, their annual conference, the Harvard kids ran circles around the old guard. They had the first clean leadership vote in decades. They overthrew the entire old guard, elected a new militant leadership who undertook a historic strike against the three automakers. No, this had never been done in UAW history. And now they've just organized the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga. It's the first new union, heavy goods union, in a right to work state in decades. Maybe ever. And they're marching through Georgia. They're going for all of the right to work states and organizing their heavy goods industries and manufacturing industries. And you love to see it. And not only that, but all of those contracts expire in 2028. And Sean Fain, the new leader of the UAW, has asked for all contracts to expire in 2028 so that they can have a general strike in 2028. So
now that would be very interesting.
Yeah. So go on. You organize your workplace. Organize your workplace. You don't even have to have the union in place to have the general strike in 2028. You can strike over your boss's failure to recognize your union in 2028, and you'll have a ton of people who are marching on that picket line with you.
Well, but there is no UAW for writers and the editors who support them. So
yeah, but there's no UAW for Harvard grad students until they join the UAW.
Okay. So Heather also told me that your first book, your first novel, was Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom.
That's right.
2003, and it was the first novel released under Creative Commons license.
Yeah.
So explain it. To me, the Creative Commons is something you just simply write on something and then you say, okay, it's, this is what I give permission for. But I'm sure that's a very simplistic view. So what does it mean to have
far off? Yeah. So when copyright was first created in the United States, it took an affirmative act to get a copyright. So you had to file a deposit copy with the Library of Congress. That's how we built the Library of Congress. And you had to, actually, I think it was two. And you then got copyright registration. If someone wanted to license your work, they knew how to find it. And if it didn't have a copyright notice on it, you knew that it wasn't copyrighted, so you could just use it. So we had a good market for works. In 1976, the 76 Copyright Act dispensed with what are called formalities, right? Which is things like a deposit requirement for copyright. And so, to use a little jargon from the World Intellectual Property Organization, where I used to be an observer delegate, this is the UN specialized agency that does copyright. Copyright adheres at the moment of fixation of a work of human creativity. So in other words, the minute you take something creative and fix it in a tangible medium, your hard drive, a paint canvas, a manuscript, magnetic tape, a new copyright just sort of lands on it, and it sits there for your whole life in 70 years, or in the case of a work made for hire, 90 years. And giving someone else permission to use your work is hard. It's actually really hard to write a copyright license that is solid enough that someone else can rely on it, and doesn't contain any surprises for you. And so these copyright lawyers in around 2001 set out to create these standardized licenses that had a few different terms. So you can use it commercially, you can use it non-commercially. You must license the other works on the same terms that I've licensed this to you. So I say you can use it non-commercially. And I also require you to license whatever you make from my work for use non-commercially. Or the other piece was you can use you can make a verbatim copy, or you can make verbatim copies as well as derivative works. So you can convert a print book to an audiobook, for example. So you mix and match those terms, commercial, non-commercial, share alike, non-share alike, and derivatives, no derivatives. You mix and match those terms and you get a set of about 6 licenses. And it's pretty straightforward. You just paste some text at the bottom. And then they went on to, of whatever work you're using, right? And then they went on to translate these licenses, both linguistically and legally, into dozens of legal systems around the world. And so what that means, so you have these foundationally incompatible legal systems, right? And they have found, they've with very careful lawyering, found ways to bridge these incompatible legal systems so that you can do things like take a CC licensed short story written by a French author, convert it into an animation using Blender and assets created by an Australian, put background music in made by a Canadian. And you can mix all of those together, although those are 3 completely different legal systems. And what you get is lawfully sufficient, and you can rely on it yourself. And so the license is launched in, from memory, January 2003. My novel came out on February 3rd, 2003. It was the first novel ever released under a Creative Commons license. It was my first novel. It had a modest print run at the time. Macmillan was doing like 6,000 hardcovers for a normal first novel, and they did 10 for mine. It sold that out. It's been in print continuously ever since. It's been translated into many languages. And it was the first of many novels I did this way. In 2017, Macmillan felt a lot of pressure from Amazon and from other monopolists in its supply chain, and told me that I couldn't do CC licensing with them anymore. And I actually think it was a mistake. I think it hurt my chances, but they did it because they had supply chain pressure.
Yeah.
And so now here we are.
Well, let's talk about your newest books, because I don't want to I mean, we could easily go over time, and I'll forget to say, oh, he also writes books.
Yeah, indeed.
So what the Bezzle is the second of a planned trilogy, is that correct? And the first was Red Team
It's the
Blues?
second in a series whose length
Okay.
has yet to be determined, but they're meant to be read in any order. So hi AI camera.
Get you back.
That's not the important part of me. Let's see, can I get it to move? Supposedly if you do this hand gesture, it makes it move.
Oh,
but it doesn't
it's
recognize
not
it very
moving at all.
reliably.
No.
It doesn't recognize it any more reliably than it recognizes my face. Nope. For those of you wondering like what's going on here, this camera is like mounted on an autonomous gimbal, and I twist it and then the gimbal puts it back. Like it thinks the ceiling is good, but it
Yeah,
doesn't.
that seems unlikely.
that- So like AI is not going to steal your job, but your boss will fire you and replace you with AI that doesn't do your job. And this is Exhibit A right here.
Well,
Um,
right.
so
Yeah.
so as I said, I wrote 9 books in my hammock during lockdown while avoiding anxiety, and one of them was this book called Red Team Blues, which I cannily have a copy of here. And Red Team Blues, the conceit was that it was going to be the last adventure of a beloved kind of rapscallion private eye who's actually a forensic accountant who specializes in unwinding Silicon Valley finance scams and who's been in Silicon Valley for 40 years and has seen every tech scams from the PC up to cryptocurrency. And this is his very last adventure, and it's a cryptocurrency heist because what could be scammier than cryptocurrency? And I thought, you can write this book that's like the final adventure of someone that you've been reading for decades and that, you've fallen in love with, have this parasocial relationship with, and just not write the other ones. Right? Just wouldn't it be cool if there was a TV show where every episode was the grand finale of a 20-season series without bothering with the tedious business of doing 20 seasons and just had that last day of summer camp energy, right? And so I wrote this book, and my agent sent me a 3-line, or my editor rather, sent me a 3-line email the next morning after I sent it to him. I didn't think I'd hear from him for months because he's a lovely fellow, but not the world's most reliable email correspondent. And it was just, that was a fucking ride. Whoa. And then he called my agent and bought 3 of them. And there was a problem because this was the character's final adventure, Marty Hench, the forensic accountant, his final adventure. And I kind of liked the guy, and I felt like he'd earned his retirement. And I kind of moped about it for a while, trying to figure out how I was going to write 3 of these. There is precedent for bringing detectives out of retirement. Obviously, Conan Doyle did this with Sherlock, brought him back over Rickenbacker Falls. But, Queen Victoria offered him a knighthood for that. My editor is a vice president with the Macmillan Company. He's a very powerful man in New York publishing, but he can't knight me. So, I ended up thinking about it, and I realized that I could write these in any order. And that moreover, if you write the series out of order, you don't have to worry about continuity, right? That you're not foreshadowing, you're backshadowing at that point. And the more, stuff you throw at the wall, the more premeditated you look, even if you're just making it all up. You look really clever. And so this is the second one of these, and if Red Team Blues was set in the 2020s and it's about cryptocurrency, this one starts in the middle of the first decade of the 21st century, and it's set in that period between the collapse of the dot-coms and the collapse of the housing market in 2008. And it's about Marty and a friend of his who sells a company to Yahoo. This was in the era in which Yahoo was taking money that started in the Saudi royal family, was given to Masayoshi's son at SoftBank, a tier 1 venture capitalist, who then gave it to Yahoo, who then spent it buying every successful and promising Web 2.0 company and destroying it. These are the same characters, if any of those names sound familiar, behind Uber and WeWork, right? They actually just dispensed with waiting for someone to start a useful company and just started useless companies and did this with them. They really figured it out. But in this period, this guy sells this company, and he ends up basically playing hooky from Yahoo for 3 years, waiting for his stock to vest. He's devoured the employee manual in California employment law and realized that he gets, 48 3-day weekends and 2 weeks of paid holiday a year if he's willing to take all the holiday, including the holiday that even the French executives don't take. And so he and Marty end up on Catalina Island, this incredible island off the coast of Long Beach here in Southern California, where they discover a Ponzi scheme. And they do a controlled demolition of it, and it earns them the enmity of this real estate tycoon who ends up getting Marty's friend fixed up with 2 felonies with suspended sentences with the corrupt LA County Sheriff's deputies who run law on the island. And the LA Sheriff's County deputies are among the most well-funded and well-armed criminal enterprises in America. And not metaphorically, they're filled with these criminal gangs who keep going down for, murder for hire, drug trafficking, human trafficking. They get caught like pit fighting prisoners in the county jails for and taking wagers on them. One gang that I use in this book, when they were broken up, among the things that the gang members who turned whistleblowers said is the gang initiation required that you murder someone. These are the LA Sheriff's LA County Sheriff's deputies. These are our law enforcement. So he ends up pleading out to 2 felonies with suspended sentences, and then when he gets caught for a third, a drugs charge, he goes to prison for the rest of his life, because this is in the period in which California has a 3 strikes rule. And this is when the story begins in earnest. These books are about unraveling scams. They're about picking them apart in the same way that, say, Margot Robbie in a bathtub explaining collateralized debt obligations in The Big Short is a way of kind of making scams legible. And the scam that Marty's tackling is prison automation. And this is where across our country, then and now, you have private firms who sell state and local lockups on getting rid of in-person visits, postal mail, parcels, phones, TVs, the library, and continuing education. And then they give the prisoners free tablets. And then all those services have to be purchased at between 2 and 5 times what they would cost on the outside. And prisoners either have to rely on their families, whose principal breadwinner is behind bars, to pay that, or they have to pay it out of their prison wages. And so the average prisoner in this country makes 53 cents an hour. In North Carolina, that's capped at $1 a day. And in 6 states, they're not allowed to make any money. And this prison tech scam is real, and it's the kind of scam that Marty specializes in unraveling. And it gets even realer when something that keeps happening with prison tech scams, which is that these companies have been bought and bought and bought by private equity companies that roll them up. And when they do, they change technology providers. And when that happens, all of the media that you've bought disappears, because that company is no longer operational. And so you as a prisoner worked for a week to buy one song, and now you don't have the song anymore, and you got to work for another week, and you're in jail for 20 years. Or far worse than that, your family spent $5 to have your kid's hand-drawn birthday card for you scanned because they won't deliver postal mail. You have to pay to have the mail scanned. And that's disappeared too. And so Marty decides to unravel this scam, this Bezzle, Bezzle. It's a term from John Kenneth Galbraith, and it describes the magic interval after the con artist has your money, but before you know it's a scam, the period during which people all feel better off because everyone thinks they're doing well. And so Marty's going to puncture this Bezzle, and nobody thanks you for letting them know that the money that they think they have in the bank is long gone. And that's what Marty discovers when he goes after this prison tech scam too.
So this is science fiction.
It's a techno thriller, although, my pal Bruce Sterling is, one of the godfathers of cyberpunk. He once told me that it's not a techno thriller unless it's got the president in it. So this one is a techno thriller, but the president's not in it. But I think of it as a techno thriller. What it does is it takes real phenomena, right? The real prison tech sector. There's a big subplot in there about royalty theft in the music industry. There's another subplot in there about Ponzi schemes on Catalina Island, and then another about environmental crimes. So Catalina Island is full of all kinds of weird and amazing things, but by far the weirdest and most amazing is that Dow Chemical dropped 50,000 barrels of DDT into the channel, which is the deepest channel known to humanity, in steel barrels that are rusting at the bottom and will eventually rupture. And there is no known way to remove those from the depths that they've sunk to now. And when they go, every bird downstream of that spot is doomed. And so talking about that the way a science fiction writer would about something fictional, using the science fiction toolkit to describe it is I think a productive way of spinning a yarn that is nevertheless about very salient things about technology and the way that technology and industry work together.
So, so don't take this the wrong way, but if I were to sit down with you at a gathering at a party and chat with you for too long, I might get a little bit depressed. I mean, is it? And I mean, you're writing about stuff that is very real. You're looking at the future, and you're looking at a future where, you know, big tech is doing things to us that I think are, you know, terrible now, but it's very easy to see how we would get lulled into that. Do you get tired of, do you feel like you're pushing a rock up the hill and it's,
So I think this is a useful place to distinguish between optimism and hope. So
okay.
I don't think much about optimism. I think optimism is just a species of fatalism. You know, it's the cousin of pessimism, where one says things will get better no matter what we do, and the other says things will get worse no matter what we do. They both agree that what we do doesn't matter. And I find that depressing, even if it's optimistic. I think that there's room for human agency. And I think hope is the idea that although the terrain is unknowably complex and history is incredibly contingent and impossible to predict, and even though we can't see a way from here to a better world, you know, that novelistic plot that gets you from the inciting incident to the climax and the denouement, nevertheless, if we ascend the gradient towards a better future, right, do anything that materially improves our circumstances, that when we attain the new vantage point, the new terrain, that from that spot, there will be revealed to us other paths by which we can continue our ascent that were occulted when we were at those lower climbs. And so for me, it's the idea that when the ship sinks, you tread water, because while not everyone who treads water is going to get rescued, no one who fails to tread water is going to get rescued. And more to the point, the guy who decided that the Titanic didn't need lifeboats wasn't an optimist, he was an asshole, right? And that, like, assuming that things will go wrong doesn't make you an optimist, right? And so the distinction for me between like a dystopian tale and a tale with dystopian furniture is that the first says that when things go wrong, we can't set them to right again. And the second says that when things go wrong, we will do what we've done every other time the second law of thermodynamics caught up with us, and we will beat entropy. We'll beat it back through our collective endeavor, our goodwill, our solidarity, and so on. And so that's what keeps me going. And I think that that's like the core message of all of these books, right? Everything I write is about how you find hope under awful circumstances. So, you know, The Lost Cause, which was my climate novel that came out last year as well. It's about people struggling under the most adverse conditions, right? Because, you know, when you've sunk a certain number of therms into the ocean, you know, the polar ice is toast, right? Like the second law of thermodynamics is not up for debate. Like a novel in which you heat up the ice but it doesn't melt is not science fiction, it's fantasy, right? So they do things like embark on 300-year projects to move every coastal city in the world 20 kilometers inland. And they build the institutions needed to make that happen, right? They have hope. You know, they confront a world that is not the world that they want. You know, as the old joke from Ireland goes, if you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here. And they say, well, you know, wishing isn't going to make it so. This is the world we have. What do we do to make it better? And they get stuck in, and they get stuck in, and they do it out of a sense of love for each other and a sense of mutual solidarity and a sense of love and duty for the people who will come after them. And for me, you know, adverse conditions that are met with those ethos are quite beautiful and fine. And if you spend your whole life working under those conditions, you'll go to your grave knowing that you made a difference.
I was going to ask you, I think you probably just answered the question. I was going to ask you, I read that an early influence in literature was going to see Star Wars. And I was one thing I was wondering is, are you more, in terms of the future, more Star Wars or more Star Trek? And I think you probably just answered that's maybe up to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those are fantasy.
Yeah.
Faster than light
Sure.
travel, definitely.
Mhm.
Also, midichlorians or whatever they're called, definitely junk science. More Scientology than science. Um, but I think that there is tremendous room in the futures that are available to us for a future in which we seize the means of computation, right? Where technology
Mhm.
serves us and not the other way around. I think that um, the handmaiden of despair is inevitabilism, right? This is why Margaret Thatcher ran around and kept saying there is no alternative. They actually used to call her Tina for there is no alternative because she was making a demand and pretending that it was an observation. Like what she meant was don't think of alternatives. And like, look, I'm a science fiction writer. My job is to think of like six alternatives before breakfast. And there's so many alternatives in our future. And like we just keep going through these incredible contingent moments. Some of them are terrible and some of them are amazing. After World War II during the Treaty of Versailles, the main Allied negotiators really wanted Germany to make reparations that were beyond the German economy to furnish,
Mhm.
and that would plunge Germany into depression and chaos. But Woodrow Wilson, not a good person, but negotiating on behalf of America and the good guy in the room in this case, Wilson's idea was if we don't leave Germany enough to survive, they will fall into a failed state and provide the base for more military belligerence and a new German imperial ambition. And he won the argument right up to the point he got Spanish flu. And then he was sidelined, and Belgium, England, and France were like, no, Germany's going to make those big reparations, right? So that was a contingency that ended very badly. On the other hand, about 7 years ago, a third-year Yale law student named Lena Kahn, who was a protege of Elizabeth Warren's, wrote a Yale Law Review article called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox that redefined how America should be approaching antitrust in big tech and other monopolistic sectors. And this essay was so brilliant that it upended the orthodoxy across the antitrust bar and across economics thinkers and just created all this buzz. And then in 2020, Joe Biden put her up for chair of the Federal Trade Commission, which is the most powerful consumer regulator in the world. And she would be the chair. So she'd be the most powerful consumer protector in the world. And they didn't have the votes for it. But there were a dozen Republican senators who were really angry at big tech. And they knew that big tech hated Lena Khan. And they thought they were being shadow banned on social media. And so they made Lena Khan the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. And in 3.5 years, she's done more than her predecessors have done in combination in the last 40. So there's a contingency that we never could have anticipated either, right? I never would have written that into a novel. It would be, too incredible to happen. Khan is amazing. Go watch her on Jon Stewart. She was just on a couple of weeks ago. She was incredible. And so, we are living through this incredible moment right now. Everything is up for grabs. Nothing is written in stone. There's always an alternative. And I don't think it's going to be Star Wars. I don't think it's going to be Star Trek. I think it's going to be us figuring out how to use technology to overcome the mistakes that we made figuring out how to use technology and building a future that the human species and our what John Weir called our horizontal brothers and sisters, the animals of the earth, can all enjoy.
We have very little time left, and there's one thing I did want to talk about that because we've talked about it on the show before. We do a Word of the Year episode every year, and the American Dialect Society. We had Ben Zimmer and folks, and we had a whole slew of lexicographers from around the world, and we had a great discussion on enshittification, which I think said at the time was based on Twitter, which I realized afterwards, but it seems like it's a very good example of
Yeah.
that. But how did that, is it fun to coin words? Is that,
Yeah. I mean, I've been coining words in my books forever. I've made up like a jillion of them. And it's funny because some of my more serious friends on the policy side don't like enshittification. They're like, I went to a NATO meeting last week and I wanted to talk about this, but I couldn't use the word because it's just not appropriate. And it's like, you know what? I had like 40 other words for this that I used. Nobody liked them, right? Like you can use one of those other words if you want, right?
Mhm.
But this is the one that people liked, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, or whatever. And it is really fun to see it be used. What's really funny is there are a lot of people who are really upset on my behalf when it's used loosely, right? They're
Mm.
like, oh, it doesn't
Yeah.
just mean getting things worse, right? Doctorow has a kind of articulated theory of how they get worse and why they get worse and what we should do about it and so on. It's true, I do. This is the book I just sold. But also, like, I'm fine with you using it loosely. I think that's what makes it a successful word, is that it becomes both a precise technical thing and a broadly understood thing that describes a lot of different phenomena. And, I'm an English speaker whose father's first language was Yiddish. So all the languages that I'm familiar with are languages that don't have a formal academy, that have descriptive rather than proscriptive dictionaries, and that are full of dialects that make them incredibly lively and
Mhm.
fun to speak. I was also raised in Canada, so I learned French in the shadow of an extremely anxious francophone population, who are really worried about loan words creeping into the lexicon, and who are quite adamant that you use no loan words at all. Like they don't like in France they'll say le snack bar. In Quebec they say le casse-croûte because that is the French word and they don't want English creeping in. And I got to say there's a joy in speaking language that changes based on the speaker and the inflection and the context, and that is a
Mhm.
living, breathing thing. It's fun.
Yes, I totally agree. And quick question, really quick, because we're actually just about out of time, and
Mhm.
I've got many more, but limited. Just curious. Speaking of Twitter, are you? Do you still peek into Twitter?
I've got a
Are you still
non-consensual
there?
blue tick because I have enough followers that Elon
Oh,
Musk gave me the non-consensual blue tick.
uh,
Yeah, I still use it. I use it, and this is the thing I describe in my shittification work, that the switching costs of Twitter is too high. That because if I leave Twitter, the people who follow me there can't follow me wherever I go, and because we live in this very fragmented media world where if giving that up before I have to comes at a significant professional price to me, right? Where one distributor, one major online bookseller, one national brick and mortar bookseller, five publishers. I can't afford to give up the very few venues I have for letting the people who want to know about my new books discover my new books.
mhm.
And so I'm clinging to it while I can. In 2020, I left the blog that I had written on for 19 years and that I still co-own, which is Boing Boing. And I started a solo project called Pluralistic at pluralistic.net, and it's grounded in this practice called Posse, post-owned site syndicate everywhere, where everything I post starts as an essay on Pluralistic. I write between 5 and 7 a week of these essays, and then it gets turned also into a Twitter thread, a Mastodon thread, a Medium post, a Tumblr post, an email, and an RSS feed, and they all link back to the original as the canonical source. And the idea is to try and suck people out of the platforms that I don't control and that are rapidly enshittifying, and suck as many of them into these federated platforms where I'm not at the mercy of some, mercurial infantile tech billionaire or their board of directors, uh, and and uh, and where I have more of that as where we started, self-determination.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're
Thank
over
you.
time, but
Appreciate
it's
it.
been really interesting talking to you. Great talking to you, and congratulations on the book. You're going to be in Canada, I think Winnipeg
Winnipeg on
next.
Wednesday,
And
Winnipeg on Thursday, Calgary on Friday, Vancouver on Saturday, and then Tartu, Estonia next
and
week.
then Estonia. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, good luck, and
Although
thanks
I
very
just found
much.
out that my
Yeah.
flight, currently that flight is not being flown because the Russians were jamming radar from Finland to Estonia. So I might have to get a
Uh,
train from Helsinki, or I don't know, there's like buses and stuff.
well, a train from Helsinki sounds
Yeah,
interesting. Anyway.
jamming GPS. That's right, Mona. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks
All
very
right.
much, and take care.
Thanks.